idea what's this pen now?
They're from us. So they're from us. There's just pens and little seeds for people to take.
So we should wait for these guys?
Oh no, they don't belong to anybody. They're just for people to take.
Oh. Free take. Okay. Okay, I guess we can begin. Yeah, sorry. Tagliatelle, siamo pronti a partire. Tagliatelle, siamo pronti a partire. Hi everyone. The presentation of Russell Sherwood about Agile development is going to begin. Please switch off your cell phones and enjoy.
Hello everyone, welcome to my talk on the Agile movement. I'm Russell Sherwood and I'll be joined later by my colleague David Sale, who will be joining me for a demo. Now I'm going to give you an introduction to the Agile software development methodology. And this is aimed at anybody who perhaps works in a waterfall software development environment, or perhaps you don't have a specific methodology in mind, and anybody who's curious about Agile and how it could benefit your development team. And if you're skeptical today, here's 3 reasons why Agile might help you. Firstly, Agile can bring you better quality software. If you're wondering why, you'll see by the end of this slideshow. Also, it'll bring you happier clients, and I'll introduce exactly why in a minute. And thirdly, if I think back a few years before I joined my current company, Sky, when I worked in a waterfall development team, I remember when coming very close to the end of a project deadline, working a lot of overtime. I remember one specific night working until midnight at work, then going home and continuing working at home throughout the night on this project. And the thing is, this is very common within a waterfall development team. In fact, just by show of hands, has anybody worked similar kind of overtime in the last month or on the last project?
Last 2 months, yeah.
Yeah? A few of you? Well, let me introduce to you why Agile can reduce the overtime that you will do. So there's 3 things why Agile will be useful to you. Quality software, happier clients, and happier developers. Today we're going to cover a brief comparison against Waterfall and Agile. I'm going to show you the Agile Lifecycle. I'm going to show you what a typical Agile team looks like. And I'm also going to show you a typical Agile month and some meetings and events which are typical in an Agile Lifecycle. This talk is about 45 minutes, and then there'll be a 10-minute gap for question and answers. So if you could keep your questions till the end, but if anything's unclear, please do feel free to raise a hand and interrupt. So as I've already introduced, I'm Russell Sherwood, and my colleague David Sale will be joining me later. And we're from British Sky Broadcasting, which is a company based in southwest London, and we provide satellite TV, broadband, and phone products to over 11 million customers. We also have a range of web applications to back up this content. And we have TV over IP services as well for our customers. So this provides them with streaming live television through their mobile phone and also on the internet. And to deliver all of these things, for example, we need this box software for the set-top boxes, we need the websites to deliver our products, and we also need these applications and everything in between. We need a wide range of development teams. And we're coding in Java, Ruby, and of course Python, just to name a few. And there's one thing in common to every one of these development teams. They all use Agile. And Agile is very useful at Sky. It's very important to us because we work in a very competitive marketplace. And what Agile allows us to be is we can be reactive to anything that our competitors do. So the great thing about Agile is it allows us to release frequently and respond to any changes often. And that's why it's very useful to us at Sky. Now specifically, David and I work on a team called Product and Offer Management. And this is a system that sits within Sky's sales platform, and it provides a service which provides complex information about the products and offers within Sky's product catalogue. Agile is very important to us because we store all the offers that Sky has, and we need to respond constantly to any offers that competitors may have. So again, we need that constant feedback cycle. We need to be able to react to the marketplace and respond to that. So first, let me introduce you to some comparisons between Waterfall and Agile. So let's imagine that this pixelated blue triangle is the Waterfall methodology. At the top there, we have our fixed aspects of Waterfall, and that's the requirements. We know that we need to deliver requirement A, B, and C. At the bottom there, what's estimated is the time that will take and the resources it will take. This is why, when we're coming to the end of the project, towards the deadline, we find ourselves rushing because we've underestimated the time it will take to deliver these requirements. Now, if we switch around that triangle, we have more of an idea of what the Agile methodology looks like. So here we have the fixed aspects of the time and the resources that we're going to dedicate to this project. Let me explain there, is that we're going to separate the time that we have for our project into small chunks, which we call sprints. Typically, in our team at Sky, these sprints are 2 weeks long. And so we estimate then what requirements we're going to deliver in each 2-week sprint. Let's look at that a slightly different way. In these graphs, the blue blocks represent the features that we deliver to our clients, and the horizontal axis represents time. So here in a typical waterfall project, some of you may be familiar, a lot of time passes, and then all of a sudden we release our product, and it's only at that point that the client sees it. And that's why, with the red line, you see the risk of failure. The risk of failure is always increasing because the client hasn't seen any product right until the last moment. If we switch to Agile, we see that at the end of every 2-week sprint, we actually have a working release of our product. And we can release that to our client. This severely minimizes our risk of failure. So you can see that every single sprint, the risk is reducing. This is because we've introduced a constant feedback cycle. Our clients see the product, and we can then react to their feedback, thus reducing the risk. Looking back now to the waterfall methodology. Some of you may be familiar with this. So, in a typical waterfall project, you're going to first start on the analysis. This is where we gather our requirements. Let's say this will take perhaps 1 month. Then only once we've got our requirements, we can start on the design. We start designing our system, perhaps wireframes. Let's estimate this another month. Then our development can begin. Only once we've got our requirements and our design. Let's say development takes 2 months. And then we've got a month of testing. Problem here is that now 5 months down the line, this is when our client receives our product. And then we've got a constant maintenance cycle. But that's 5 months of time has gone past in this project. So perhaps what the client wishes have changed. Perhaps they may at that point realize that what they wanted is different to what the development team understood that the client wanted. And then we've got problems. The Agile Lifecycle can fix this problem. And this is what the Agile Lifecycle will look like. The entire project will be broken down into tasks known as story cards. And this forms what is known as the product backlog. Each of these red blocks represents a story card. Now, remember I mentioned a sprint. Now we're going to take a subset of those story cards, and that's going to form a sprint backlog. Now what a sprint backlog is what we estimate we can deliver within this sprint, typically perhaps 2 weeks. Now every single one of those story cards will go through this story card life cycle. It will start with a defuzz, where the development team will discuss with other members of the team and nail down the exact requirements for this task. The development team, along with the quality assessment team, will then write tests together and then write the code to pass these tests. Then only when the card passes specific criteria, called acceptance criteria, we then say that this card is done. And this card is then ready to be released at the end of the sprint. Now, there are many flavors of Agile, and you may indeed have heard of some of these. I'm just going to discuss today what the key things are and how things work where I work. But the most common Agile flavor is Scrum, and that's used in approximately 50% of Agile teams. At Sky, we use predominantly Scrum, and we use some extreme programming or XP practices as well. However, there's a few things that these all have in common. And in 2001, 17 developers met at a ski resort in Utah to discuss the future of Agile. And they came up with something called the Agile Manifesto. And they said, we favor individuals and interactions over processes and tools. That is, they recognize that self-organization, self-motivation, and co-location of teams is much more important than the processes of a project. They also identified that we value working software over comprehensive documentation. It's much more important to get quality working software than to make sure that we've got all the documentation done. That's not to say we don't need the documentation, but we're identifying here what's more important. We'd rather spend our time making sure we've got quality software than writing documentation to cover every aspect of it. We also value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So in a waterfall project, you may notice that there's a lot of upfront contract negotiation with the client. You're nailing down those requirements during the analysis phase. With Agile, there's constant customer collaboration. This is very important for the feedback loop. We're always releasing and we're getting our client or our stakeholders' feedback on that, and we can change our product and make it better and more in tune with their exact requirements as a result. And finally, responsiveness to change over following a plan. Similarly, we've got the feedback loop, and we get the feedback from the client, and we can respond to any changes that they have in requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, there is value on the things, on the red items, the items on the right, but we value the items on the left more. So you can't just say, oh, we're not going to do the documentation, that's Agile. Documentation is still important, but working software is more important. Now I'm going to introduce you to what a typical Agile team looks like. So the ideal Agile team is between 5 and 9 co-located members. It's much better that all the members of a team are in the same place, so we maintain the communication throughout the team. This is very important in an Agile team. And if at all possible, this should be done. This is what our team looks like at Sky. So we have the Scrum Master. Scrum Master's role is to facilitate the team. They'll be ensuring that all the Agile processes are followed. They'll be making sure that specific events happen at the right time. They'll be making sure that everybody that should attend are there. Their role is also to remove any impediments that the team may have. So, for example, if the development team have any problems in delivering the story cards that they're tasked to do, it's the Scrum Master's role to remove them. They'll also act as a buffer between the team and the stakeholder. This is very important because it prevents overcommitment and any distractions of the development team, so they can focus on the task in hand. What's very important to note is that there are some distinctions between a typical project management role and a Scrum Master, in that an Agile team is self-empowered, so all of the teams have empowerment. And a typical project manager role from a waterfall team could fit into many different roles in an Agile team. So perhaps they could be a Scrum Master, they could be an analyst, or they could be a manager of several teams. It all depends on the company, the size of the company, and what the company does. Next on to the analyst. The analyst is the owner of the product backlog. They'll be managing the cards, and they'll be the ones deciding the priority of the cards that are going to be delivered in each sprint. They are the bridge between the stakeholder and the development team. So to the development team, they are the voice of the stakeholder. And it will be the analyst that will be going to the stakeholder and nailing down exactly what's required for each card. And we also have a quality assurance team. The quality assurance team will collaborate constantly with the developers to ensure that we have tests in place and edge cases for every single card. They'll also be the last point of call for every single story card to ensure that the card meets the acceptance criteria specified. And only when the QA team are happy that the acceptance criteria are met, then we say that this card is done. And that's when the card is released in the product that's released at the end of the sprint. So let me introduce you to the typical Agile Lifecycle. Central to the team will be the Scrum Board. Now this is like a whiteboard or a pin board, and this will be the key point of communication between the team. Using this, the whole team will be able to see the status of the project, and they'll be able to see what all the members are working on at any particular time. Now you'll notice here that we've got the story cards in post-it note form, and at the beginning they'll start in the first column on the left in the product backlog. And as cards are done, they'll move their way to the right. So first, once we have decided what cards are going to be in the sprint backlog, the cards that will be in the sprint backlog will be moved to that column. Here it's marked to do. Then, when a developer is free, they'll pick up a card and move it into the work in play column. At that point, you'll see that we've got these little Simpson characters. These are avatars, and each one represents a different developer. When a developer picks up a card, they'll put their avatar on a card so that the entire team will know who's working on what at any particular time. When a card is done, it will then be moved to the testing column. This is when the QA will ensure that the cards meet the acceptance criteria. When the QA team are happy, then the card moves to done. You'll notice here that we've got three different colours of post-it note. And this is a suggestion, and this is the way that we work on our team. So this indicates the different types of story card that we may have. We could have a regular story card, here shown in blue. We could have defects, shown in pink. It's important to distinguish between these because we really want to get these released as quick as possible. And also there's technical debt. Now there are many online Scrum boards available if it's not possible to have an actual Scrum board in your team. So this is one that I like. This is Trello, but there's many available, so try them out for yourself. But these are available in case it's not possible to have a whiteboard in your team. Now, every working day starts with a daily stand-up. Now this is an opportunity for every member of the team to answer 3 questions. They'll say what they did yesterday, what they're going to do today, and any impediments that they may have to do their work. Remember that it's a Scrum Master's job to remove these impediments from the team. Each member will talk in turn, and to manage this, you can have a little token, perhaps a ball, that passes around between the scrum during the stand-up. This ensures that just one person talks at the time so that other people aren't interrupting. This is very important because this is an important collaborative feedback event so the whole team communicates what they've been doing. Also, you'll notice that everybody's standing up for this meeting. This is because it should typically be no longer than 15 minutes. And in everybody standing up, this encourages this to happen. Now, let me introduce you to a typical Agile month. Okay, so this month is split into 2 sprints, two weekly sprints. Every sprint begins with a planning game. This is where we plan which cards are going to be delivered in this sprint. Just an estimation. And then at the end of every sprint, we'll end with a showcase, a release of the product, and a retrospective. And I'm going to explain what happens in each of these events now. So at the beginning of every sprint, we have a planning game. This is where the analyst will present every story card in turn, and each member of the team will have a set of planning poker cards, similar to what we have here. Now you'll notice that there are abstract numbers in the Fibonacci sequence here. This is going to be representative of the effort that the developers think will be required for this particular card. And there are different scales that you could use. For example, some teams use t-shirt sizes, small, medium and large. It all has the same effect. The idea is it's an abstract scale. And you also get more of a feel as you progress through sprints on the relative size of each card and what each card means in terms of size. Now, each member of the team will then present a card on the count of 3, and then an argument ensues, or actually a peaceful discussion. Firstly, the people at the lower and higher end of the scale will contribute their ideas on why they think it's those particular numbers. And then the entire team will have a revote. And this will continue until everybody agrees on the effort required for that card. Now these numbers are quite important in that as we progress through several sprints, you get an idea of how many points you can deliver in each sprint. And this is known as velocity. This can give you a lot greater ability to estimate as you progress through your project. And this is our typical team at Sky. This is us for taking it in a planning game. Don't know if that's clear at the back, but you can see that each team has a set of cards, and also these planning poker cards are available as an app, as some people are using there. Right, so what's it like to develop within an Agile team? So we've got our cards for this sprint, we've had our planning game, development begins. And every single card starts with a defuzz. This is where the development team, the people who have decided to do this story card, will sit down with the QAs, the quality assessors, and also with the analyst to discuss exactly what's required for this story card. Remember that the analyst is the voice of the stakeholder, so they'll be able to answer any questions that the developers may have. This is the point of the defuzz, so the developers are exactly clear in their mind what's required to deliver this task. Within our team at Sky, test-driven development is very important, and we use it for every single card that we do. For those of you unfamiliar, this is where we write a failing test first for the code that we're about to do, and we watch it fail. We then write the code to pass this test, and then run the test again, and once that's passed, we know that our card is done. This is fantastic because it keeps our focus. We're just coding for the task in hand. It prevents any gold plating. Imagine if we're doing a login form and then you suddenly think, oh, wouldn't it be great to have this pop-up window or some bells and whistles on the form? But test-driven development prevents this happening because you're always coding just to pass the tests for this card. We'll give you a little demo later of what it's like to work in a test-driven development environment. Now also, in our team at Sky, we use pair programming. Now this is a practice that's commonly used in the flavour of Agile called extreme programming. So some Agile teams may use it and others may not. We find that it really works at Sky. It really helped me when I joined the team because I was entirely new to Python when I started at Sky. And in pairing with senior developers, I learned a lot and very quickly from them. And it wasn't just a one-way process because they learned new ideas, new processes, and new coding styles from me at the same time. There are other advantages to pair programming. It brings confidence in the code that you're writing. It's much better to have two heads looking at your code, and you know that somebody else is reviewing your code as you code. You also have the shared success. This really boosts team morale. When a card is done successfully, you can share that success between your pair. You can learn and share coding styles. And also pair programming leads to better designs, shorter code, and faster problem solving. And more importantly, mistakes are caught early. So because you've got two heads looking at the same piece of code, you'll have fewer defects in your software and better quality software. So I've explained test-driven development, and for unit testing, we use nose and unit test Python packages. We'll show you what that's like later during our demo. We also use behavior-driven development. Now, for those of you that may not have worked using behavior-driven development, this is where we write tests in the form of given a user goes to a login form, when they type username and password, then the user will be logged in. So we have that given, when, then syntax, which is known as Gherkin syntax. And for those of you who are interested in learning about behavior-driven development, we had a talk last year at Europython 2012 entitled BDD Testing in Agile Development at BSkyB. And that's available on YouTube or the Europython website if any of you are interested in BDD and looking into that further. We also use deployment scripting. So for this, we use the Python package Paver. This is useful because every member of the team, whenever they check in to the code base, there's a suite of tests that are run. This works as regression testing, so every time we release a new piece of code, we've got a whole code test suite that's running, so we know we haven't broken any old code. This leads to reliability and quality in our software. Now finally, if we look to the end of a typical sprint, we have the showcase. The showcase is like a demo of the software, what you're going to be releasing in this particular sprint. Here, if you can see them, they're a bit dark images, sorry about that, but you can see that the team is watching a working demo of the software at a showcase. At a showcase, it's meant to be an open environment, so the team may be invited, but also other teams perhaps, maybe the stakeholder may be there, anybody that's involved or interested in the product and what you're going to be releasing. And you'll be demoing exactly the features that you're delivering in this sprint. Also at the end of every sprint, we have a retrospective. A retrospective is a key feedback point for the entire development team, in fact, for the entire Agile team. And this is where the whole team will get into a room and they'll have a set of post-it notes. And each team will contribute their thoughts on how the last sprint went. And they will discuss what went wrong, they'll discuss what went right, and they'll discuss things that they can improve for the next sprint. This is very important for our feedback cycle. So remember, as well as we've got the feedback from our client, here we get the feedback from our fellow team members. A suggested way that you could run this retrospective is you could have different colour post-it notes. So here for the what went wrong, we've got the pink ones, what we could improve, yellow, what went right, green. And then each member of the team will discuss, in turn, each of the different post-it notes. And using this, we should come out of a retrospective with action points on how we can improve in the next sprint. So it's a constant learning process, and we're improving as we continue through the different sprints. Now, I'd like to invite my colleague David Sale up, and we'll go through a demo. So today, we're going to show you the typical life of an Agile card in the Agile Lifecycle. Sure. Sorry, bear with us.
The mirroring thing's not at the top.
Oh yeah, go to show all.
Pair programming.
Yeah.
Yes.
Show mirroring.
Up arrangement.
Ah, yeah, there we go. No worries.
Okay, so today we're going to show you the life of an Agile card through the Agile life. Oh, sorry. Through the Agile Lifecycle. Oh. Is that okay? Through the Agile Lifecycle. We're also going to demo what it's like to work in a test-driven development way. Can everybody see the screen okay from where I'm standing? Right. Okay, so we've got two available developers. We're going to take a look at the sprint backlog. Notice we're using Trello here that I introduced earlier, an online Scrum Board. So let's take a look at the sprint backlog, and we're going to pick up this login form. Let's open that. Sorry, do bear with us. Typical teething problems. Okay, perfect. Oh yes, number of times we've gone through the demo, but we knew this would happen. Perfect. Okay, so if we pick up the card, we want to look at that acceptance criteria. Remember, they're in the given, when, then syntax. So here we have, given the user is on the login page, when the user enters their email and password and clicks the submit button, then the user should see the OK message. So that's our acceptance criteria, and we know once this passes, then this story card will pass. Now, because this card is in the sprint backlog, we know that we've had a planning game, and this card has been given 8 points. Okay, so hello, testing.
I'll leave me this one.
Okay.
I was one wrong. Yeah. This one.
Thank you. Hello. Right. So we're going to be using Selenium, which is a great unit testing package for testing user interfaces. So here we have setup method, which will be run before every single test, and this will create a WebDriver instance in Chrome. We also have a tear down method, which will be run after every single test, which will destroy that instance. And we've got one test user can log in, which at the moment goes to this URI and gets the source code. We also have a Flask skeleton. All this is doing is rendering the template from login form HTML. And at the moment, if we take a look at that URI, we'll see we've got a blank canvas ready for our login form. Right, so as we're working in a test-driven development environment, we want to write the test first. Now you'll remember that from our acceptance criteria, we want to add an email address. And in Selenium, we check this using self.driver.findElementById, and then the ID of the element we're looking for. So let's run this test. Remember, the code doesn't exist yet, and we want this to fail. This should be a failing test. Indeed, it has failed, and we get a very useful error message which tells us exactly what's happened. The element doesn't exist. We get a no such element exception, and also we're told what test this failed on. So we know exactly what code to write in order to pass our test. So let's write this element. First, we're going to give a label for the email address field.
Why is that of course? It's not in your test.
Sorry, what was that?
Why is that of course? It's not in your test.
That's a very good point. Sorry, the gentleman at the back said, why is that of course? Indeed, we didn't write a test for this label, and if we had more time, we would. It's just for the sake of this test so that we can fit it in within the time allowed. But you're certainly right. If we were coding completely test-driven development, we would be writing a test for this label. Thank you very much for noticing that. Okay, so we've written our input field, and so let's run our tests again. Okay, and that test has now passed. Let's take a look at that. Okay, great. So we've got our email address field. Now you remember also from the acceptance criteria, we wanted a password field. So let's write that. Using the same way, we're using an assert statement to check that the element exists and checking find element by ID password. Using Selenium, you can also find elements by class or name as well. So let's run that test, and we see indeed that that element doesn't exist. And we're given a very useful error message to show us exactly why the test has failed. So let's add that. We're adding the label there, which of course we'd have a test for in a proper environment. And we're going to add the input field, ID of password, and a type of password. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Right, our tests have passed. And let's take a look. Now you'll notice there wasn't actually a test to test the attribute type on that input field. So let's do that for the submit button. So in a similar way, the find element by ID can return an object which represents the element. And on that element, we... Oh. Carry on. Sorry, I was ahead of myself. So on that object, we have the getAttribute method that we can run to check the attributes on that object. So we're going to check type, and we're going to check that that is equal to submit. We run that test, and it's failed for exactly the same reason. The element doesn't exist yet. So let's quickly add a submit button, ID of submit, and a type. Let's test this. Let's put text, and let's see what happens with the test. As you'd expect, that's failed, and we've got a very useful error message on why that's failed. So we've got an assertion error, text is not equal to submit. So we know exactly what to code. We know we want to change that type to submit. Let's try that test again. And we've passed. Let's take a look at our form. Great. Now, given more time, of course, we'd style this. We'd add some CSS, make this look a bit nicer. We've done that already, so we'd look like this. And, of course, we'd have some background code to actually authenticate the user and log them in. But it should indeed still work. Yeah, let's run that test. Oh, well, there's something we didn't try before. Let's not worry about that. That wasn't planned, but thank you very much for for that. I'm sure there's a very good reason. Ah, there we go. The IDs are slightly different. Right. So let's imagine that we've added that background test. All the tests, the background code, all the tests are passing. We can then move the card into QA. So at this point, the QA team can then pick up the card and double check that our code matches the acceptance criteria. Once they're happy, they'll move the card into the done column. And as available developers, we'll go back to the sprint backlog and take a look at what cards are available. And we start working on the shop widget. Yes, hello.
As I saw in Teardown, you had a closing driver for Chrome, but it looks like that you still have a lot of Chrome instances while repeating your test.
You're absolutely right, yes. For the benefit of anyone that didn't hear, we did have a teardown method which was intended to destroy the Chrome instance after every single test. Now, this worked on David's computer and it didn't on mine, and we never actually really looked why that happened, but it certainly should destroy the instance, and thank you for noticing that. That's absolutely correct. Never did work out why, but I'm sure it's a very simple reason.
You should look now.
Okay.
For the questions, probably. Oh.
Certainly sounds like it's working. Sorry about this, everyone. Hello. I invite you all to become more agile today. So, just to summarise, and then adopt an agile lifecycle. This will allow you to release often, receive frequent feedback, and react to feedback quickly and efficiently, which will lead to quality software, happier clients, and a happier development team. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, suppose you are dealing with a classical prima donna developers that is the only one able to maintain your code that, by the way, you don't document it very well because you are following your agile method. And this guy doesn't give a damn to come to your quarter of an hour meeting in the morning. He's coming at 11 and leaving at 12. He's doing a perfect, fantastic software. What you do? You make him redundant or you keep him?
Well, it's the Scrum Master's role to ensure that everybody attends the meetings as they should. So they will ensure that everybody attends at the right time. Now, I've seen different ways of ensuring that everybody appears at the Daily Standup. One, and I worked on this team at some point last year, was that if anybody's late, they have to put £1 into a pot. And that pound is then collected, and at the end of the sprint, the team is treated to lunch based on thanks to all the people that were late. So quickly you ensure that developers aren't late for the stand-up, and if they are, hey, we all get free lunch. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, psychological things are more complex. But anyway, another question. Suppose your customer base is such that you cannot simply align all of them at the same time to the same release, but maybe they have their software filled in some, I don't know, E-square, EEPROM things, so that you get your customer support people receiving phone call from hundreds of people having dozens of different releases of your software that are not aligned, and then you get crazy understanding which release this guy has at that time and which bugs is in that release. So it's not that always so easy, like, I don't know, in your case maybe easier, suppose you are upgrading a certain web server and then people always download these things. But when releases are more complex to deal with, I mean, your method cannot always work.
So what you're saying is that, just to make sure I've got your question correct, you're saying what happens when you've got different sets of customers and you want to release one version of software to one set and another version to another. Is that?
I'm saying that you cannot always pretend that people get up to date to your latest releases. And if you are, again, sometimes you are forced to have specific releases at a certain time just because you simply have a certain hardware coming out at a certain time. And you have to be there at that time. And you have to provide the next release in 6 months from now just because the next hardware will be available at that time. That's something that happens. You have to deal with that. That your releases time are fixed and constrained by something else, not just by your development. And you cannot simply say every 2 weeks I provide software to my customer base because your customer base will not receive it.
Okay, this is true. Perhaps at the end of the sprint, you might not always have a releasable version of your product. In this case, you may release it just internally or to other teams so they can test. You don't always have to release your product at the end of every sprint. So it's not always essential.
Yeah, but in this case, we'll be missing the feedback from the customer base then, okay? This is something that makes things more difficult.
Okay.
Can I just pick up on the first point that this gentleman raised about people not turning up to Scrum? You're quite right. It's the Scrum Master's responsibility to make sure everybody is there. And in our teams, we've adopted a process where we will start the Scrum even if some people are still walking there to try and encourage everyone to be on time. We have one guy in our team who, for personal reasons, works in a mid-Atlantic time zone. And so but because the team is empowered, we decided that the best time to have our Scrums was at 11:45, just before lunch. That has two effects. First of all, it means that this guy who wakes up late can make the Scrums, and secondly, it gives us a second reinforcement for when the Scrum will end, because everybody has to go to lunch, usually the pub. So you don't want your Scrum to be too long.
That's fantastic. Thanks for your contribution. So, of course, depending on specific reasons or your specific team, you may change certain processes. So you could put your daily stand-up back, put it later to accompany different time zones. Sounds like a great solution. Thank you. Hello.
Hello. You were comparing the waterfall method to the agile method. In the waterfall method, the first two steps were analysis and design.
Can you put the microphone?
Sorry. Yep, the first two methods in a waterfall were analysis and design. That corresponds to the job of the analyst in the Scrum. Is that correct?
Yes. So the analyst in a Scrum team, in an Agile team, will be focused on gathering the requirements from the stakeholder. So it's very similar to the analysis process.
And you mentioned in the waterfall method it took quite a long time to do the analysis and the design, typically maybe a month or something you were saying. Is there much lead time in this method in Agile? Does the analyst have to work on the thing a month before you even start?
Well, you see, the difference is that in the waterfall methodology, you'll get all the requirements up front for the entire project. While in an Agile team, the analyst will just get the requirements for the requirements at that specific time. So they just want to get the requirements, for example, for what's going to be delivered in the next sprint, and it will be an ongoing cycle. So you'll continually get new requirements from your client. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment maybe about what first gentleman said. That sometimes you do have external constraints which don't let you actually kind of do it textbook Agile. But contrary to what Agile Manifesto says, you actually can use parts of Agile and they work by themselves, just parts. And you can still do things partially Agile to get the benefits of those parts that you're using. For example, I work for the UN, which is like not the most Agile organization, as you'd imagine. And for example, the test team is a separate team for basically structural reasons. They are separate from us, but we are still doing test-driven development. So unit tests are kind of done in an Agile way, but then the functional testing is done later just because that's how things work. And we sometimes give the customers something like a waterfall-like interface on top of actually Agile process. So they have to pay for it a little bit, but it works better in the end and it's more predictable. So really you can still combine things and kind of figure out your own way which will work for you, I think.
This is fantastic. Thanks for your contribution. So indeed, every company is different and every team is different, so you can adopt Agile and take the processes that work for you. Thank you.
Okay, another question here. I also actually work for the UN in Rome, Food and Agriculture Organization, and I'm trying to get, as the gentleman just said, some Agile methods into the bureaucracy there, but it's a big mess, and and I was wondering if you have if in Sky, when you arrived there, they were already using Agile, or was it something that started afterwards, and if so, any tips on helping teams that are not used to it get basically the bosses to agree to give it a shot?
Thank you for your question. Yes, so when I started in my team, the team had already adopted Agile. However, in order to integrate me, I went on a week's training course to ensure that I was on board and I agreed with the Agile methodology. So that's perhaps one way, perhaps ensure all staff are fully trained and that they're all on board and they buy into the idea of Agile. Perhaps show them why it's going to be a great idea for your development team. And that's what I'd suggest, is to make sure that you have the training in place and make sure that you have buy-in from all members. Does that help? Thank you. Yes?
So you compared Agile to Waterfall and stressed the iterative development cycle of that. I came, as it were, of age in my programming career in the 1990s with, like, say, Steve McConnell's Rapid Development book, which stressed the, what's it called, the Rapid Application Development Methodology, which also stressed iterative development as is, I mean, it was known back in the 70s. So many of the things you've talked about seem to be the same thing that were in rapid development, the books I learned in the 1990s. So what are the differences, not between Agile and Waterfall, but between Agile and Rapid Applications Development methodologies? Most of the things I see, like daily builds, has a heartbeat, being able to deploy, iterative cycles, all seem to be part of that same sort of thing. So what are the differences?
Thank you for your question. I haven't personally worked in a team that uses rapid application development. However, it sounds that this perhaps was a very early version of lightweight software development. And you remember that in 2001, a group of developers came together and they gathered their thoughts on the future of Agile. So indeed, perhaps this methodology may have contributed to the future of Agile. But I'm sorry, I can't...
It's only dibs, but I don't know the differences are. When people talk about Agile, I can't tell the difference.
Between RAD and Agile? RAD. I'm very sorry, I can't answer that for you right now, but if you feel free to email me, I will find out and I'll get back to you.
It seems that everyone's talking. It just seems that when everyone talks about Agile, they compare it to Waterfall, but there are a number of best things that were in the 1990s labeled best practices. That seems to be the reference should be not between Agile and Waterfall, but between Agile and best practices of 10 years ago to know what's improved.
Indeed, thank you. Well, my aim for this talk was just to compare against Waterfall because a lot of people are familiar with Waterfall. But indeed, that's a very good point. Thank you. Hello.
Hi, thanks for the excellent talk. I'm wondering how using Agile methods would help me with the following situation. I have a client with a project, and by its nature, the project is hard to loosely couple. It's a very complex architecture. Yet, so we have a basic design because we start up quickly, and halfway through the project, it's going on very well, and suddenly it turns out that there's a design choice that was misunderstanding between you and the client, but it affects a lot of elements in your design. So it would take a lot of time to refactor to meet the new demand. Is that just a thing that Agile can, by its nature, help with, or is it a different problem?
So you're saying you're experiencing that you're developing and then your requirements are changing halfway through?
Right, like an assumption was made that turned out like, oh no, that's not what I wanted at all, said the client. I wanted X, and you should have known that, but you started writing things too fast. You should have designed we should have sat down longer at first to get a better understanding of what the requirements were.
So Agile really lends itself to this scenario because we're releasing a version of our product often, and your stakeholder, your client, will get to see the product early. You'll then get the feedback early from the client, and you'll be able to react to that. And then you'll be able to bring any changes that they suggest, perhaps into a later sprint. So really, Agile helps. It would be so much easier in an Agile team. Does that answer your question?
I hope it will help. Yeah, sounds
well,
good.
certainly give it a try, and good luck.
Sure.
Hi.
Hello.
I want to ask you if you use a bug tracker, and if you do, how does it interact with Scrum? Because it seems to me that there's like some overlapping. For example, if you have a bug tracker, you can have an issue, and it can be in progress, it can be done, or it can be like a to-do. So do you use a bug tracker? How does it interact with this?
No, we don't use a bug tracker as such in our team. We use Jira to keep track of all of our story cards, and any defects will go into Jira just as another story card. So no, we don't on our team. Okay.
Sorry, but the time is over, and we have another talk, so I cannot delay. But I want to recall everyone about the pie barbecue this evening. And in 5 minutes or so, the next talk will begin. And so, thank you.
Thank you.